My name is Morgan Major, and this is my presentation on bone histology for Bio 161. First things first, before we begin to jump in to the histology of bones, when I first started this assignment, I thought that I should probably address what histology is in general, in case some people are not familiar with the term. So, the definition of histology is the branch of biology dealing with the study of tissues. And this is not a vocab word for this particular lesson, but I did think it was important to cover before we jumped into histology more specifically with bones. And I included this little picture because a lot of times when we're looking at microscopic images of histology, breakdowns. There's a lot of pink, so just a little fun image before we jump in. The basics of bone cells and tissue. So we all know what bones are generally, that our body is filled with them, but what are they actually made of? Bone is a connective tissue containing fibers, round substance, as well as living cells. So this diagram on the right here shows kind of the breakdown of all of these different pieces that make up bone. So we have the big bone here, and then one of the main components of bone is collagen. As you can see here in this image, we have collagen. Collagen is a protein that is found within bone tissue. And then we also have, as you can see here from this breakdown of the collagen, hydroxyapatite is a mineral that is made on the collagen fibers of bone from the combination of calcium phosphate and calcium carbonate. The combination of these two items creates the basis of bone, hard and durable from the hydroxyapatite, but also flexible from the collagen. So moving on, there are two different types of bone tissue that we'll talk about when we're talking about the histology or discussion of the tissues of bones. So the first type of bone tissue is spongy tissue, and that can be seen in here, this pink area. And then the second type of bone tissue that we'll discuss is called compact bone tissue, and that is demonstrated here in the lighter color. So both of their names give us a little bit of insight into what they actually are. When you hear the word sponge, you can picture like a kitchen sponge. Think of it as something that's more flexible. It has a lot of like open holes in it. And compact, we think of something that's more dense, more rigid. So spongy tissue is much lighter, while compact tissue is much more dense. And if we come back to our little diagram here, we have this little, just a little tidbit of information on the bottom, just reiterates, compact bone, sorry, compact bone surrounds spongy bone. So the spongy bone is on the inside and the compact bone is on the outside of the spongy bone. So you might be asking yourself, what is the point of spongy and compact bone tissue? Does one matter more than the other? Do we have more of one or the other? Is one really like what makes bone bone? So to answer your question, both spongy tissue and compact tissue are important components of bone tissue, and they serve different purposes from one another. First of all, like I just mentioned, you hear spongy, you picture a kitchen sponge. So spongy bone tissue has open spaces all throughout it, and it is like a sponge. This allows for the bone to support shifting body weight. So it allows for a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more movement. And then compact tissue is much harder, much more dense than spongy tissue, and it is much more durable than spongy tissue. So compact tissue being harder, being more durable, being more dense allows it to resist outside pressures. So these two have different strengths and they work together to be able to prevent bones from breaking as best they can. So where are they found? I touched on this a little bit, but just to kind of reiterate, both compact bone and spongy bone are found in most bones. And again, spongy bone is on the inside of the bone. Compact bone is that layer on the outside, protecting the spongy bone. So in long bones, compact bone is found under the shaft and fibrous layer of the bone, and then spongy tissue is found deeper in the bone, inside that compact bone layer. Moving on to components of compact bone tissue. So you might have seen on the original slide, there was something called osteon. An osteon is the basic unit that makes up the bone tissue. Each osteon is comprised of lamellae, a central canal, a perforating canal, canaliculi, osteocytes, and lacunae. And I apologize for any mispronunciations of these words. So here is some fun vocab. As I just said, an osteon is the basic cellular unit of bone tissue. The central canal runs down the center of the osteon, and it is filled with blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves for that bone. So since this is obviously part of the human body, it needs to be able to be connected to the rest of these symptoms to receive things like blood that it needs. So that's where that comes in, the central canal. And just to jump down here and just to tie it together, the perforating canal branches off from the central canal to connect those blood vessels, those lymphatic vessels and nerves to other parts of the osteon because it has to be able to get all within there. So the lamellar layers are rings of calcified matrix. The canaliculi are channels within the bone tissue that connect with the lacunae. The lacunae actually contain the osteocytes, which we will then be saying an osteocyte is the primary cell of a mature bone. So here is a diagram that I drew, and I apologize, it's not the greatest drawing. I'm definitely not an artist, but you can see here, if this was an osteon, this would be the central canal in the middle. These blue things on the rings would be osteocytes. The rings themselves is a lacuna. These lines here are the canaliculi, and inside is the lamellae. And then if we had another one of these and they were connecting, or like connecting within, there would be a perforating canal. So we just discussed how osteons are part of compact bones, but you might be wondering if they're also part of spongy bones. So as we just learned, osteocytes are mature bone cells, and they are also found in spongy bone. However, in spongy bone, they are arranged in a different way than they are in compact bones. In compact bones, osteocytes are found in rings surrounding the central canal, like we just saw here. So they're found on these rings. However, in spongy bone, osteocytes are arranged in more of a lattice structure, which may appear more random and less like uniform than in this one. However, it has a distinct method to it, and the way that these osteocytes are arranged in spongy bone is called trabeculi. So now that we've learned that an osteocyte is the cell of a mature bone and is located in both compact and spongy bone tissue, you might be wondering, how are these osteocytes created in the first place? So as we just said, osteocytes are mature bone cells. but they start off as osteoblasts. So an osteoblast is also a type of bone cell, but it is not as mature as an osteocyte. Its job is to create new bone. Osteoblasts eventually turn into osteocytes as the matrix around the cell calcifies, locking them in. They're not able to serve their purpose anymore. They become osteocytes. And you may be wondering, oh, osteoblast, what about osteoclast? So an osteoclast is essentially the opposite of an osteoblast, while an osteoblast is responsible for creating new bone tissue. Osteoclasts are a similar type of bone cell, however, instead of creating new bone, they break down old tissue. Osteoclasts and osteoblasts are always working together to generate new tissue and reabsorb old tissue. And here you can just see osteoclasts break down old tissue, osteoblasts form new bone tissue. Neither osteoblasts or osteocytes are capable of mitotic activity, meaning they cannot divide. However, osteogenic cells, which is a type of stem cell, do divide. They're the only bone cell that is capable of mitotic activity. So they are found in areas of the bone where new growth occurs, and osteogenic cells eventually become osteoblasts, and then the cycle begins. And here is just one more little example where you can see three types of cells in your body that bring about changes in our bones. So just to recap, osteocyte, mature bone cell, osteoclast, the bone cell that is breaking down, reabsorbing old, damaged bone tissue, and osteoblast is generating new bone tissue. And here are my references.